Good afternoon, folks. How are we this afternoon? And welcome to the Two Davies minus a Davy. Well, we've had that happen over periods of the last few years because of David's health considerations. And once again, we're in the same place. Okay, as I said this morning, right after the show, I would be leaving here to put out 1,800 quid of your money. There is 3 transactions for £600 at the bottom. And they went to Baby Bank Scotland, the Drumchapel Family and Food Bank Centre, and to the Glasgow-based artist known as Michael Larkins, better known within the movement as Wee Scribbles. The Wee Scribbles has been raising money for charity for as long as I've known him, and I've known him for a very, very long time. Now, he's supporting 2 baby banks at the moment, one in Kilsyth and the other one in Cumbernauld, I believe. We'll get that clarified by Wee Scribbles later. Anyway, Scribbles was in contact with me and he sent me a copy of the receipt that he got for his bank when the money hit his account within seconds of it being sent from our bank, which was absolutely fantastic. And Agnes, out at Baby Bank Scotland, asked me to thank you all. And the nice young fella out there in Drumchapel nearly fainted when I told him how much we were giving him. And he was nearly in tears because they're struggling apparently, and it will make a huge difference to them. So, Tubbs, I'll be Scribbles. Aye, Kilt King. But, as I say, that's it out. And it's out before Christmas. And what comes in this month, as we did last year and the year before, when it comes to January, it'll go out to the same 3 organisations. So they'll get a good Christmas, the kids, thanks to you guys, or a better Christmas anyway. And the babies and children of Scotland will get a good start to the new year, thanks to you guys, or a better start to the new year, thanks to you guys. So, David and I want to thank you for your support this year. We want to thank you for the support that you've shown the community this year. And it doesn't half make us smile to see the community we've built here being so caring towards the community, the wider community. And that's what it's all about. Robert, how is Mr. Milligan doing? Well, he was on the phone to me as I was writing the show, actually, trying to get me to insert something into the programme. And I said, sorry, David, I don't have time to do the background research on this story, so I can't do it. I just can't do it. It was an interesting story. If it makes the papers tomorrow, David's given me a lot of the background. I'll have a look at it after the show. But no, he's all right. He's all right. But as I say, David and I would like to convey our thanks for your support. And I'm sure the wider community here in Scotland would like to thank you as well. Because we've made a big difference in the 4 years we've been doing this, folks. A big difference. And I'd like to think, if nothing else, the legacy of this programme will have been, when it comes to an end, that is, and there's not going to be any time soon, but I'd like to think the legacy of what David and I have done and what you guys have done when this programme comes to an end, if it ever does come to an end, will be remembered as the good work we've done for the communities across Scotland and our endeavours to free our land from the tyrannical power, imperial power next door. All right. Anyway, let's go on with this, shall we? As I say, let's see who's in. I'm fluffing this out a bit, folks, here. I don't know if I'm going to last an hour. Hi, Stephen Bankier. Hi, Robert the Bruce. Hi, Francis McKenna. Hi, Julie Brown. Hi, Kilt King. Hi, Stephen Shelton. Melanie. John Thompson. Ackies. Hashbury Stumbles. Chris Fisher. Stephen McNeil. Robert the Bruce. Millie Jameson. Indy Scott Bryan. Kirsty Hamilton. Charlie Campbell. Hi, Charlie. How are you, mate? We've had all you guys. Desiree, how are you up there in the Highlands? I think I've seen Tina in there somewhere as well. Hi, June. Well, that seems to be everybody so far. Back down the way, we've only just hit the 100 mark, bit slow today, but it is getting close to Christmas, folks. What we do notice where the period, because I have a look at the analytics and how the channel's doing, and it's pretty well constant, to be fair. But what we do find is in the summer, when the warm's weather, people spend more time outdoors, so the audience figures drop. And in the month of December, particularly, as people have got a lot to do in the month of December, pardon me, with the festive celebrations coming up, the figures tend to drop off a wee bit in December as well. But we're always up there the 100 mark, which is good gone for a live programme. So thanks again. Okay, let's get this underway. So we'll start off with some news for the branch office of English Labour in Scotland. And it would appear that English Labour in Scotland, MSP, Pam Duncan Clancy, has quit her front bench post as education spokesperson for the branch office. After it comes to light, she's still friends with Sean Morton, ex-Labour councillor for Gabbers, and he was convicted in 2017 for having indecent pictures of children and extreme porn. Now, Miss Clancy said in her resignation letter, it was poor judgment. No, it wasn't, Pam. It was more than poor judgment. It's a bit like poor judgment. Is that no sort of Andy's excuse? Andy Windsor Mountbatten's excuse when he kept the friendship going with Epstein after Epstein was convicted. 8 years on, she's still pally with a guy who's, got dubious taste in porn, to say the least. Anyway, the Labour Party have said, that's it, over with. She did the right thing. She's resigned the front bench. She gets to stay in the back bench. Poor judgment. Is that what we want in office here in Scotland, is it? Is this what Labour wants us to put into power here in Scotland? Poor judgment. The Conservative and Unionist Party and the Labour Party, doing through the years, have had some right grubby bastards amongst them. They maybe want to look at their vetting processes and do some background checks on the people who they are putting forward for public office. Because 8 years ago, this guy was convicted, and Pam's still his pal today. That's no bad judgment. That's just total disregard for the crime the man's committed. Throw in the fact that Miss Glancy, you heard me right, Miss, doesn't seem to mind that her pal likes pictures of children and compromising positions. The mind fucking boggles. So we recently had a Labour councillor in Fife diddling a 15-year-old. Some weirdos in Aberdeenshire playing with children as well, I think it was. There seems to be a history of this stuff in these two parties. You could probably bunch them in with the Church of Scotland, the Church of England, and the Catholic Church on these issues. But you could throw them in with churches on these issues, the two main political parties. It seems to be endemic amongst them. But there wasn't a bad judgment, Palm. You made a conscious decision to stay friends with somebody who obviously had some dubious ideas on what's normal when it comes to sexuality. I mean, think about that term. Indecent images of children and extreme porn. Wow. You couldn't make it up. You're right, if it was an MSP, they're demanding a sacking and they'd be demanding a by-election. Aye, the hypocrisy of it, eh? But to say it was bad judgment and still to be friendly with the guy for 8 years after his conviction, that's a Prince Andrew special, innit? Or sorry, Andrew Windsor Mountbatten. Although he is still a prince, he's not allowed to use the title. You know. The other big story here in Scotland over the weekend, of course, is that Lord Offord, and I went into this a wee bit this morning, has defected to Reform. And at the announcement of his defection, he announces that he'll be taking charge of Reform UK's campaign here in Scotland. Now, this is the guy, folks, as I tell you this morning, who was employed by the Westminster government to come up with an AstroTurf grassroots campaign to be played out in the last couple of days of the Scottish Independence Referendum 2014 by all the broadcasters and by the state. This guy was dangerous in 2014 and he's dangerous now. And he hasn't walked the floor to Reform without reason. He's either been offered a shitload of money for his experience in this sort of astroturfing campaigns, which I expect to get for Reform. Now that we know that Nige has got an extra 9 million on top of the 5 million donations he took in. So he's got a 14 million pound war chest, which I doubt he'll want to spend very much of. But it depends on how much he would like to get into power. But this throws up a problem for the other unionist parties here in Scotland. Because the independence movement, very few of them will be moving to vote for Reform. If Corbyn's party was credible, then a few of them might have voted for your party because they're talking about, of course, it's right for the people of Scotland to have a say if that's what they want. You could have seen them being a risk here in Scotland to the independent vote. But as we know, your party is in bloody chaos. They don't like each other. They can't agree on anything on principle. And I don't expect that one to get much further, actually. Which is a bloody shame. They had mass support. It might have made a difference in England. It might even have made a difference here in Scotland. But as I say, Lord Offord, Malcolm Offord, he's dangerous. With his money, his expertise, and his contacts, because he has dumped his interests in Akanshi, means that he is a threat come this election. So we're going to have to work doubly hard to ensure that Reform are defeated here in Scotland. And you're right, Fuba. Voter apathy is the biggest threat. So we've got to make sure that we inspire people who get to the ballot box. We need to inspire people to get there. And that's not just the party in Holyrood or the party in Westminster. That is we, the activists, as well, have to inspire our friends, family, and neighbours to get to the ballot box. So that was a good point, Fuba. But as I say, Lord Offord is a danger. We've seen how effectively he put together that campaign on the quiet over a 2-year period for the Westminster government. He is a problem, but he's no joining Reform out of principle. He's a statesman. He's fully owned by the power, privilege, and patronage of the body that is the state. So they've told him to go. and health reform. One in Scotland. That is interesting, because when we get to the English section or the wider section of this, we're going to talk about how the state has turned on Farage and is offered being sent out there to put the nail in the coffin. Has it been sent out there to bring Scotland under the heel? Well, we don't quite know. We don't quite know. But the next story up's an interesting one, folks. And it's nonsensical. But the BBC are running a piece this morning on bad legislation being written in Holyrood. And it cites 3 bills out of hundreds. And if you add in statutory legislation for down south, having to be going to statutes as well, you're talking about thousands of pieces of legislation. The BBC have found 3 badly written bills. One on taxing empty business properties, which had to be amended because of 400 million quid of taxes that's been collected, which could be due back, and there could be court fights with that. They found another piece of legislation, which was pretty poorly written, and that had to do with the new Rent Controls Act. And then they found a bill that passed 5 years ago, but it's never been enacted. So out of all the hundreds and hundreds of bills that have been written in Holyrood, they found 3 bad ones, and they're asking, is Holyrood bad at writing legislation? Now, that made me think, why would they be asking that question when hundreds and hundreds of pieces of legislation have passed successfully and have not been a problem, and have updated and brought into line Scots law or current thinking into Scots law? And then I said to myself, well, let's go and see how many bad pieces of legislation have been written in Westminster. And I looked to our 40 years, from the 1990s right up to present. So roughly 40 odd years. And all I could find was 7 pieces of legislation which were considered bad legislation for Westminster for that period. The Poll Tax 1990, the Child Support Agency 1993, the Hunting Act 2004, the Field ID Card Act 2006, the Right to Rent Act 2014, and the Use of Secondary Legislation Act 2017, also known as the Henry VIII Act, which allows ministers to amend laws and even insert laws using secondary legislation, bypassing both the Commons and the Lords. Now, so 7 bad pieces of legislation which have been highlighted, specifically our 40 year down that road and 3 hour 25 year here. What's the point of this article? Out of the thousands of acts that are passed, like in the last Parliament, I think there was 77 acts passed. So, what's the point? Why would you be asking, after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bills go through the Scottish Parliament without problem, why would you be asking if they're bad at writing law? Well, the answer is quite simple. Westminster now realises that devolution has been a disaster. And rather than take us further away from independence, it's pushed us towards it, as we see how much better we exercise power by ourselves than they do down that road. So they need to get rid of it. But unfortunately for them, in order to get rid of it, there would need to be a referendum. So before they can have a referendum on the Scots voting to get rid of their own Parliament, They need to convince us it doesn't work. And that brings us back to the BBC and why it's so comical. You know, here they're talking about Hollywood writing bad acts, and we're like, everything we do is bad. You expect us to pay any notice of what you're saying? When day in, day out, first thing in the morning to last thing at night, you tell us we're shite at everything. I mean, how the BBC expect to keep influence here by telling us we're crap at everything? Do you actually think we're paying attention to them anymore? Fucking nuts. Honestly, folks. It's nuts. So, 7 pieces of bad legislation through Westminster since 1990. And 3 pieces of bad legislation through Holyrood since 1999. And the BBC asks, is Holyrood bad at writing legislation? You couldn't make it up. You really couldn't. But we'll get to that, Robert the Bruce. We'll get to that. The BBC and Farage are working together. We'll get to that. I think we're going to find that they're starting to turn. So, as I say, I could only find 7 bad acts at Westminster. I was expecting to find a plethora of them, but I didn't. And according to the BBC, they could only find 3 at Holyrood over 25 years. It would appear that legislators are no bad at writing law, actually. There you go. There you have it. But to say that, I found that piece really, really interesting. You have a search engine, folks. Ask it how many pieces of legislation have passed at Holyrood, and what I'll tell you is too many to count. And it says the same thing for Westminster. So it does. Okay, this is a bit that Sir Larry the Cat likes. And this is political education time, according to Sir Larry. To you and me, it's just reminding ourselves of things we already know. And if there's anybody young here, they might learn something. Now, we've covered socialism. We've covered liberalism. I said I wasn't going to cover neoliberalism, but I am. I'm going to cover it in the next programme. For a very specific reason, folks. It's to give us an insight in how far into neoliberalism we have gone. So once I've spoke about neoliberalism, I'll put up where corporate bodies are now running state departments here, whole swathes of the state here in the UK. But today we're on fascism. So what is fascism? Well, we all probably know, and as you probably know, that my partner in crime, Mr. Milligan, has been writing about fascism as well. But fascism, oh, and by the way, as we get into this, keep your head turning. And as we go through it, think of how many of these things we've seen in recent years from the UK state. Okay, right, fascism is a far-right authoritarian political ideology emphasising extreme nationalism, militarism, and dictatorial power, subordinating individual rights to the state for national unity and strength, often involving suppression of opposition and glorification of the nation through violence and control. Now, before we move on, modern fascism, because fascism has been around well beyond what I'm going to call modern fascism. And I said I wasn't going to touch on communism because it's not really touched these islands in any great way. But you say, but David, neither is fascism. And I'm about to remind you that it has. It had a different name under supreme monarchy or absolute monarchy. It was called tyrannical. But it's the same thing. And in England, particularly, there have been a lot of tyrannical monarchs. So, who have we had? We've had Henry VIII, we've had Charles I, we've had, I think it was Edward II, Mary I, Bloody Mary, as she was called. So, Henry, we'll go for the earliest one recorded, and that would be Edward II, 1307 to 1327, seen as an incompetent ruler who favoured corrupt favourites, leading to England's near ruin and his eventual deposition, eventually being deposed. Mary I, 1553 to 1558, didn't last long, known as Bloody Mary for her persecuting Protestants, burning hundreds at the stake during her short reign. And of course, there was King John, infamous for losing French territories, heavy taxation, and cruelty, leading barons to force him to sign the Magna Carta. Richard III, a controversial figure known as a tyrant, often blamed for murdering his nephews, the princes in the Tower. Right, Charles I believed in divine right of kings. He clashed with Parliament, dissolving it, and his tyrannical rule ultimately led to the English Civil War and his execution. And of course, Henry VIII, he was famous for executing people, thousands of them. It's estimated that he managed to execute between 50 and 72,000 people. But as I say, fascism's been around a long time. Modern fascism is what we're talking about here. Okay. And a lot of it's just the same. So, as I say, it's a far right ideology, a authoritarian political ideology emphasising extreme nationalism, militarism, dictatorial power, subordinating individual rights to the dictator's idea of the state's rights. And it's operated through violence and control. Core characteristics: extreme nationalism and ultra nationalism. That's why they're calling us nationalists in Scotland on the right, even though we've redefined nationalism and have created a left wing civic nationalist movement. All right, now we've got authoritarianism and totalitarianism, and that's centralized autocratic rule by a single dictator and a single party with extensive control over public and private lives. Militarism, glorification of military power, war, and strange viewing conflict as a way to prove national vitality. Wow, slaughtering the young is a good way to prove national vitality. That's a great way of killing national vitality, you silly buggers. Suppression of dissidents. Well, that one's quite prevalent today. David and I are a case point. Forcible crushing of political opponents using violence and propaganda. And of course, cult of personality. Loyalty to a magnetic, charismatic leader. And anti-democratic and anti-liberal. That's the other thing about fascism. They reject individual rights, equality, pluralism, and democratic processes, viewing them as weak. And of course, economic control is ultimately important to a fascist, because if that fascist controls your economic prosperity, then you're more likely to bend to his will if he stroke she was going to reward you for it and make your life easier for it. Now, the two key figures in what we call modern fascism was Benito Mussolini in Italy in 1919, and of course later 1930s Germany with Adolf Hitler. Now, they became infamous throughout World War II, but what brought them to power was actually disillusionment with the young democracies that were around. At the time, when we talk about young democracies, well, empires and absolute monarchy was the norm across Europe right up until the 17th, 18th centuries. So when we talk about young democracies, then we're only talking about 200 or 300 years. All right. Now, when we look at it and we think, how many of these things do we see happening here? Well, on the right in England, we've got ultra nationalism promoting intense, often exclusionary national beliefs, their nation or race to be superior. That's the Tommy Robertson mob down that road. Authoritarian leadership and totalitarianism. Power is centralised under a single dictator. Well, we're seeing the way that previous prime ministers and Starmer's doing at the moment is concentrating power in the cabinet office. And when we talked about bad legislation, one of the reasons why the previous Tory administration under Theresa May introduced the Henry VIII laws, or the secondary legislation thing, was so that they could concentrate power, almost becoming a dictatorship, by committee at least. You know. And as I say, authoritarian leadership and totalitarianism, power being centralised. Militarism and violence. Violence is accepted and glorified as a legitimate means for national rejuvenation and expansion of national power. Paramilitary groups like the Italian black shirts and the German brown shirts were used to intimidate and suppress political opponents. Suppression of opposition. Well, let's go to militarism and violence. We'll go back there. We'll get the suppression of opposition in a second. No, militarism and violence. Well, we talk about the Terrorism Act and all these people being done for showing support with a peaceful protest movement, or although a direct action peaceful movement. And then we look at things like the Police Crimes Courts and Sentencing Act down that road. All clamping down on the right to protest. That's clamping down on opposition as well. But the show of strength for the police and things like that, these things, in order to shut them down, that's pretty much militaristic. It really is. So, militaristic and violent. The way people are being lifted off the street for holding bits of paper, well, if they're non-compliant, it can be violent. But it can be violent just a peaceful being arrested peacefully. It's a violation of your rights to freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom to protest, freedom to gather. So that is a point, it is a form of violence. Then, of course, suppression of opposition. We see that happening with anybody who opposes the UK state's continued complicity in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And of course, one of the key characteristics of fascism is to scapegoat and to demonise a minority or a group of minorities. And we're seeing that happening here when it comes to refugees and those who are coming here through legal migration. So there are some tenets of fascism which are actually kicking around the UK state at the moment. But the ones that really concern us and should concern us here at this point in time is, of course, the cult of leadership, which Farage is counting on, and Trump has managed to pull off with his MAGA mob. And, of course, the suppression of individual liberties. These are the factors that are at play here at the moment. These are the big ones that are at play here at the moment, which shows that we're on the slippery slope to fascism. And then, of course, there's the consolidating of power in the cabinet office by the use of secondary legislation, bypassing both the houses of Parliament down that road. So it is creeping in. It is creeping in. So fascism, what is it? Well, it's a political idealism which is based on a ultranationalism, authoritarianism, militarism, suppression of opposition, scapegoating and demonisation of minorities, and anti-liberal, anti-communism and anti-democratic rights and views because they're seen as a weakness. And one of the other main tenets of fascism is strict social hierarchy, which of course is dictated by the leader. So I hope that reminds us all what fascism is, and it means that we are now up to date again, and it's in the forefront of our mind because remember, it's playing out in our politics today, right now. See, there's a few things that we're seeing there that the state is actively doing here. Suppressing any opposition to the state and demonising of minorities. Started off with single mums and now our own refugees and asylum seekers and, of course, immigrants. So there are some key tenets of fascism at play here at the moment. And having all the tenets of fascism at the forefront of your thoughts as we go forward will be important for being able to flag up when the state becomes more authoritarian. All right, so right-wing ultranationalism, authoritarianism, militarism, we're seeing that playing out in all with the talk of ramping up the military. Suppression of opposition, we're actually seeing that in play here. Scapegoating and demonisation of minorities, we're seeing that happening here. Anti-liberalisation and anti-communism, well, that's no really playing out here. Liberalism is actually flowing. It's a flowing movement. Went from classic to modern, now neo. They say I wasn't going to talk about neoliberalism, but as I was looking more and more into it, because I've already explained what it is, it's a dereliction of duty by the state, but it more or less hands over the running of the state to corporations. But the reason why I'm going to cover it, and I said I wasn't going to cover it, I'm going to cover it on Thursday, is I want to highlight key areas in the UK where the UK government has handed over responsibility for huge amounts of the state's responsibility to private enterprise. All right. And of course, the other thing about fascism is it's a bit like the old class system, strict social hierarchy. So keep all these things in mind, folks, as you observe our politics going forward. All right. So that ends today's session on political ideologies. As I say, it's not really for us. It's for anybody young who might actually catch this. Because I don't know whether these things are taught in schools or no anymore. A long time since I was at school. But when I look at some of the younger vloggers and bloggers and they talk about being off the left and things like that, and then you realise that they don't really understand what the left is or was, because they've never actually lived through a socialist regime. Whereas Maesties, who are 50 and above, myself, I lived through the tail end of the socialist experiment, 60, 70, 79. So it's always good to put these things out there and remind ourselves of what's going on. All right, let's move on. Next up, Starmer, Macron and Merz meet Zelensky in Downing Street today to discuss Trump's latest peace plan. What's interesting about this, folks, and this really gets my goat, watching this, watching the US and Russia negotiate Ukraine's future without actually involving the people of Ukraine. They're negotiating it, and then Trump's team are presenting it to the Ukrainians and trying to force them to swallow it. So what's the three amigos doing in Downing Street? Well, they're telling Zelensky, Europe will stand with you. Of course they'll not. Concessions made now to Putin will just strengthen his hand. And as he knows time's short, he'll start galloping across Europe as quick as he can. So he will. So, of course, Starmer, Macron, Merz, they're going to tell Zelensky, we stand behind you. Don't accept the US deal. Because although the headlines are there to discuss it, they're no. They're there to tell Zelensky, rubbish, you can't accept this. You accept this and he's going to extend. And extend in his predecessor. Sorry, his successor might continue that. And before you know it, we'll get the Russians on the march through Europe again. Who'd have thought who'd have thought any of this shit? I mean, when the Berlin Wall came down, who'd have thought we'd go to where we are today? Oh, in the 1990s, the wall comes down, the hope that spread across Europe. And here we are threatened with a new Cold War. Two failing leaders, two failing superpowers seem to be playing. And it's costing people their life. And it could cost the Ukrainians half their bloody land. Mental. Right. Now, this one's a cracker, by the way, folks. This one really cracked me up. Westminster and the Labour government ripping the piss right out of the English people today with the announcement that they are going to introduce 50,000 additional apprenticeships over the next 3 years to combat youth unemployment. Combat youth unemployment? I nearly fell off my fucking chair laughing. 50,000 new apprenticeships over 3 years. 16,667 point to infinity per year. Hello, Employment Secretary, Department of Work and Pensions down that road. There are 702,000 fucking unemployed youths in England. You think 16,000 apprenticeships a year are going to make a fucking difference, you dafties? I mean, really? 702,000 people, young people unemployed in England, out with education or out with work at this point in time, and they think introducing 16,667 new apprentices a year is going to make a difference. It's not even going to fucking fill the void of the amount of people who have come out of these professions each fucking year to retirement. Nuts. It's a bit like I was saying the other day there when Labour were talking about no being the party of benefits, but being the party of workers. They better get their fucking head wrapped around being the party of benefits, because nobody's going to have a fucking job in this contracting market. Nobody's going to have a job in this contracting market. Crack you up. But really, so 16,667 new apprenticeships per year in the next 3 years is going to make an indentation in 702,000 and rising of youth unemployed down that road. Talk about treating the English people like mugs. Like mugs. You couldn't make it up. And they've got a cheek to put that in the press as a headline, as if they grab the attention of the populace, as if we're that fucking stupid we don't know that what the unemployment figures are. FIFA Peace Prize. That was one of the cringiest and funniest things I've seen in my life. Trump with his peace medal. His football peace medal. Yeah. You see him in the White House on Monday. I stopped the war between Celtic and Rangers Football Club. I stopped the war between Liverpool and Manchester United. I stopped the war between Real Madrid and Barcelona. That's the end of the derby as we know it, guys. Trump's Peace Prize has just said we've all got to be pals and cuddle. Anyway, back to youth unemployment. Oh, really, you couldn't make it up. No, you could. Absolutely brilliant. Hey, you want to, hey, Angie, if you do get back into cabinet and that's coming up, and they give you back the housing brief, you better update fucking apprenticeships, because according to the SNP's purchasing managers index, you're in trouble on your 1.5 million houses a year. Big trouble. Because apparently they just ain't got the workforce. You need more than 16,667 apprentices a year to fill the void in the construction industry. That's for sure. Anyway. Yeah, talk about which, Angela Rayner. Starmer says she will be back in cabinet, but doesn't say when. All right. I thought he said there was going to be honesty, transparency, and accountability. I guess it was only lip service. Right, let's move on. Police open inquiry into Farage's campaign expenses to get elected. Poor old Nige. It would appear that he is no longer the golden boy of the press. Too much here stink round about him. Go to do with racism. And it would appear the state's no enamoured with him anymore. So the police have been ordered to investigate him. You've got to ask yourself, why aren't the police investigating Labour together in 700,000 odds? Oh, that's right, you only get a slap in the wrist for this stuff, don't you? So do you think Farage gives a fuck about the police opening up an investigation into his election expenses? That's the least of his worry. His big worry at the moment is that his mainstream platform is disappearing. His party stopped advancing in the polls and has started going backwards. And as people get more and more a look at this guy and a look at the sort of administrations he's put together in the council areas, I'm afraid the shines come right off that polished turd. And it would appear the media is starting to get it. The very people that polished the turd and put it on the stage are starting to turn on it. Now they'll try to herd it towards the toilet to flush the fucker. But once the mainstream shut him down, and they will, come the next general election, I don't see him being a problem. I can see him still getting promoted until after the 2026 Holyrood election, because I say they're shiting themselves. They need a strong unionist opposition in there. And there isn't going to be one. Or there might be as an additional unionist party in the parliament, which won't help. But they're splitting the MSPs between them. They're not gaining any. Farage is a bigger problem up here in Scotland for Labour and Tory and the Lib Dems and what they are for the SNP. That's for sure. But as I say, it would appear that the news outlets that polished the turd and put it on the stage and built the cult of character, which is Nigel Farage, are starting to lose an armour with him. And that means he'll start to lose influence. And his cult of personality will start to fail as people turn on that personality. I say I don't expect him to get slaughtered too badly until after the Holyrood elections, but after that, I think you'll see the mainstream media go hammer and tongs at destroying Farage. At which point does he cut and run? Don't know, but he's got a history of cutting and running, isn't he? UKIP, Brexit. They were on the third incarnation. So at what point does he? But I don't think this time when he runs, he'll be coming back at all. I really don't. This one sort of really Disney surprised me, folks. This next one, even though it disgusts me. It would appear in their infinite wisdom, the half-wits at Labour HQ down that road have decided that trans women will not be allowed to attend conference, the Labour Party's female conference events, the sort of side events you get going on, well, the ones that are meant for females only. Trans women will be excluded. This one keeps bringing a question to me, folks, and it's a question we should all be asking, and that is, why haven't Labour rewritten the Equalities Act or amended the Equalities Act so that it does exactly what its name fucking says and gives us all equality in life and in the eyes of the law? Why haven't they rewritten the Equalities Act? Why are they doubling down on this culture wars nonsense? When you think about the Equalities Act, it was there to make sure we all get equal treatment, equal rights. Yet, in its actual writing, they totally missed a false swathe of the population. But the better question is, it could be easily fixed. Why is there nobody willing to fix this? Why is the LGBTI community, or whatever the letters are these days, to be excluded? Makes no sense to me. But to announce that you're not going to let trans women attend women's side events at the Labour Party conference, that's just not on. There's not much to say about kids starving in Easter's last week. I said a bit about it last week when I seen the pictures in the paper, and I says, look at this fucking idiot sitting there smiling and all that, and the people hovering around about him. He entered into a room, I'd need to leave. The stench of corruption would make me vomit. The smell of death on that man would make me fucking hurl. And folks, we're going to end up on a rinse and repeat story, which tells us that the UK state is bankrupt and is out of ideas. And that is that Pat McFadden announced that young people to be stripped of their benefits if they refuse a YTS scheme after 18 months on the dole. So what's this all about? Well, apparently they're not calling them YTS, they're calling them taxpayer-funded jobs, 6-month jobs, YTS at reduced wages, subsidising some employer somewhere for cheap labour. Apparently they're going to strip the kids of what little means that the state provides. So the YTS scheme was the last incarnation of it that I can remember. The first one was the Youth Opportunity Scheme. Then with the Youth Training Scheme. I think there was one coming after that as well. Can't remember what one it was. But now we're back there again. But now they're being called state-funded jobs. It was York for you, was it Fubar? No, it was YTS for me, but I never actually did any YTS. I was at college and joined the army. It's the same shite over and over again. Now, folks, this is the stuff that really gets you angry. Not an original thought in their heads. They're morally bankrupt and they're out of ideas. You know, this is just rinse and repeat. Unemployment's high. Make it cheaper for people to get cheap labour and force the unemployed into these so-called training schemes. So that what little employment's left out there will be unavailable to full-time workers because they'll be full of yops doing the job on the scheme. YTSers, yoppers, doing the jobs on the cheap. And as for any meaningful training, there is no meaningful training in it. Because you're going straight from school to a YTS scheme, you're used to get up the fucking morning anyway. And being out all day. Because that's the only skills you learn. Just keeps you in the knack of getting out of your bed in the morning and being out the house for a number of hours. So you ever go out these things. They're only ever 6-month programs, so you couldn't learn any proper skills. Oh, crap. Let's say it's rinse and repeat. 80s, 90s, now we're into 2000s, same fucking daft ideas. As Einstein says, you know, the very definition of stupidity is to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different outcome. And it would appear Westminster's good at it. Right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. It would appear I have filled the hour. There's always plenty to talk about. There really is. And as I say, examples of bad law, what they call badly written law or bad law. That was a funny story. The youth training schemes never really went away. They never did. And Ukraine, they're going to be forced to take a deal that's been negotiated by others, where they're not even taking into consideration. Say, your phone. Oh, she's got it. So, you guys, after yourself. I'll be back tomorrow morning, 10:30. Don't be late to be on the naughty step. Get your eyes on the prize. The prize is 2026. Prost. Bye for now, and well done, folks, on your achievements this year on helping your community.